I spoke to somebody in the CV clinic yesterday whose community development work was pretty integral, not only to his field, but to his ideology. It was an example of his ideology and practice. And for that reason, he had a lot of his community development work as a whole section in there. This is very often the case if you're looking at NGO work. You've done international development work. You've been working on projects in other countries. That could be put in sections at the end. But again, you're tying relevancy. And these non-conventional items are actually the thing that makes you unique. In the arts, this is quite common. People will have examples of artwork in not just art galleries, but in different kinds of community showings. Sometimes they'll have publications that have nothing to do with academia at all, but are kind of interesting for other reasons. You could have those in there. People have salad dressing CVs and hybrid lives. They're not pure categories. We know this. And we've been playing this silly dance for hundreds of years in academe that says, no, we're pure categories. No, we're not pure categories. There's all sorts of really interesting variations out there. And we're finally at a stage in academe where these are beginning to emerge in language on our CV. And that's not just what makes you weird or peripheral. It's actually what makes you unique. And that also gives you an idea of what are the kinds of contexts with somebody with that unique combination is going to be a best fit for. Don't try to hide those. Foreground them, particularly where the fact that you've got an unusual or broad background is related ideologically to how you position your research, how you position yourself. There's really important reasons why you would want to keep that in there. Okay? Is there anything on your CV that we have not covered here? Yeah. Service? Service. What have you guys done in your service? What have you got under service?
I've done a lot of work in the community with different nonprofit organizations.
So when you say service, you mean non-academic service?
Yeah, I mean, well, because I know there's academic service,
yep.
But also community service.
And you could do, absolutely. And this is where, under service, you could use two subheadings. Okay, and do it that way. You could do it depending on how related the community service is to your field, to your research, to your ideologies, to your political positionings. You could have that as a related activities section rather than service. You can articulate that in any way. In terms of other kinds of service, there was a bunch of people that had their hand up. What other services do you have on your... Yeah.
Organizing conferences.
Organizing conferences, that's a big one. Right. And back here?
Actually not under services, but internships.
Internships. Now, what was the relationship between your internship and the rest of your experience? Was it an integral part?
Yeah.
Yeah. And absolutely, that would be near. It would be in with this professional training thing. You could have your internships. Some universities have a teaching course that you can take, university teaching, that kind of thing. Anything around, they have workshops on being a TA. That stuff can go in there.
I had a question actually about how much to include with this kind of stuff. Like, for a while I had a lot of positions with the Graduate Students Association.
With the GSA?
Do you just list them all? I mean, I stopped including all of them because it seemed like it was, I don't know, it just seemed like it would be viewed as a way of bulking up a resume unnecessarily instead of having lots of qualifications.
You don't have to separate them. When you have a lot of experience in one area, like a GSA type of experience, you don't have to itemize each thing individually. It's good to have it. You could say collectively, volunteered with GSA, and then a couple of did roles including A, B, C, D from this year to that year. Like, you can cluster them. But in some cases, if you are on a negotiating committee, for instance, that mediation experience would be relevant to something that you were researching later on. In fact, I'm at York, so there's a lot of research that comes out of the strikes at York. So, well, you got to find the silver lining. So even here at Congress, there's a couple of sessions that are directly relevant to that strike at York. So it's part of sort of academic production at that point. So again, it depends on context, situation, other kinds of experience that you're not too sure what to do with. Okay? Yep.
I've sat on various committees.
Committee work, that's a good one. And if your university allows it, try and get onto those communities. Apart from anything else, it's not the cachet so much, although it's good to see that. It gives you tremendous insight on what goes in a decision-making process in academia. How does that work? Like I just got set on a committee that's going to be choosing a program dean. I was on the program executive of my field, mainly because I'm just curious. How are these decisions about how comps are structured? Who makes those decisions? What's the process that goes into that? I wanted to know. So from a personal perspective, it's quite interesting, but it does give you some valuable service. That this is the type of person who has historically worked with other people collaboratively in the environment. They haven't just been focused on their own work. If they've been doing this over time, they're probably the type of person who is a collaborative person. It's not just something they put in there once or twice. There's a history of service, of giving back to the community, of being involved. And that's seen as being a very good thing. Yeah.
Should the journal reviewer be...
Could you speak?
Journal reviewer?
A journal reviewer, absolutely. And you can do that in a couple different ways. You can do it under service. You can do it under publications as journal reviews. It depends on the substance of it, the status of the journal, what exactly you are doing. Same with editing, that kind of thing. I do a lot of multimedia work for coursework. And I sort of stick that in my teaching somewhere because technology and interactivity is one of my areas. Not that you can tell from my slides. Rule of thumb for both CV and resume, you may not lie or misrepresent anything on either document at any time, under any circumstances. However, you are under no obligation to include everything on either document. So, where it is relevant, where it will help you, where you can tie in a connect to the content or the context or function of the role for which you are applying, by all means, put that other stuff there. If not putting it there is going to raise a lot of questions. So if you've got 20 years experience doing something that's not on your resume, on your CV, and you've got a BA from 1980 and a PhD from 2000, what happened to this person in the intervening years? So it may be necessary to put some of that in there just to fill in the gaps. But if a lot of folks do other things while they're working on a PhD, in between their degrees, whether you put those in or not, depends on the circumstance. It tends not to be a primary consideration in a selection process. And it would be something that would show up at the end of your CV for the most part. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to have. And again, in places where the studentship, the student body, is going to value your relevant work experience or your real world work experience, that can also be a very valuable thing, especially if you can draw a connect. Because you've done that, you can relate to your students' context. Because you've done that, when you're teaching, you take time to draw connects between what they're learning theoretically to the world around them. Like if you can find sort of how has that changed your practice, why are you doing what you're doing because of your background, not in spite of it. And it's very often those things that we've done that make us different, that also make us unique enough to draw attention in the best possible way in a job search. If we try not to hide it, but if we integrate it and are able to find the logic, how is that informing who I am?